Hi there, it's Alexandra here from the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog, and it's the July garden tour. And the reason why we are doing the garden tour right now is that just for 1 or 2 days the garden is absolutely right now. And you know how when you normally as a gardener show people your garden and they say, oh yes, that's lovely, and you say, oh, you should have seen it last week. Well, I would really like you to see the garden now. And in Northern Hemisphere gardens, there can sometimes be a bit of a gap in the garden around early July, so it might help you to see which plants are doing well here. First, I'll describe the garden. It's about 100 foot long, and it's about 80 feet wide at its widest, and about 40 feet wide nearer the house. Near the house we've got our major bed, which is where I concentrate all my gardening and where all the colour usually is, because that's quite time saving. If I put all my efforts into the bits we're going to see, then it's much easier to kind of leave some of the other back beds really to kind of get on with things or use low maintenance plants. The last few weeks have been really quite warm, with temperatures running from about 18 degrees Celsius up to 25 degrees Celsius, which is lovely and warm for an English summer. And we have also had rain, and usually we get either masses of rain or complete drought, but we have had rain and sunshine. So the garden is really enjoying that. We've recently had Faversham Open Gardens, which is a local open garden scheme, and we open our garden along with 20 or 30 other gardens, and it happens on the last Sunday of June every year. If you love your garden, I think it's really worth making an effort to get together with friends nearby and opening them. It raises money for charity. It's a great way of getting the community together. As a gardener, it gives you a day to aim for. There's really one day in the year when you're definitely going to clear up all those pots that have been hanging around. And people love to see other people's gardens, and I don't think they expect them always to be absolutely perfect. In fact, they quite like it when they're not. We had about 700 people to the garden, one of which was top vegetable and allotment YouTuber Sean James Cameron, who came down to Faversham to see our allotments, and he popped in here.
Well, I just happened to be passing and I saw a sign for free cups of tea, so I decided to come in.
And he then went off to the allotments, and he said that he'd never seen allotment sheds with life belts on the side of them before. Now that's because our allotments in Faversham are based where the old gunpowder works used to be. And in the days before rubber tyres, it was much safer to transport gunpowder by water than it was to go on the cobbled roads, because it was quite likely to explode. And now, of course, there isn't a gunpowder industry here in Faversham, but we do still have the waterways, and the allotments are built around some of these. And that does make them quite special. And that's another good thing about opening your garden, is you do see things through other people's eyes. And one of the things that someone said here was that they really liked the way one of the paths has a hedge on one side and flowers which are up at your eye level on the other. And she quite liked having those taller plants really near to her face. And I hadn't deliberately thought of doing it like that, but I think I will do more of that when I plant that area in future. So what plants have been doing really well for me now at the end of June, beginning of July? The lavender has been fantastic. It's just been out now for about a week. It'll probably be out for another few weeks. And the pollinators just love it. And having it in that great, enormous chunks in the middle of the garden creates a really big impact. So even if there wasn't much other colour, that actually, I think, would carry the garden forward for several weeks. The huge climbing rose that I mentioned in the last garden tour is still looking good. So it's been going for 3 or 4 weeks, and we've now decided that it's Kiftsgate. It is an absolute thug. It's going for about 40 feet in both directions, but it does smell amazing. We've also got some repeat flowering roses called Cecile Brunner, which are low growing, and they make a little low hedge near the terrace. And these will look good probably for about 2 to 3 weeks. I'll then clip them back and we'll then get a second flowering, which will probably take another month. So that's a very good rose to have. And the third rose that I've got here is something which is called Rose Gojard, which dates back to 1957. I didn't order this rose. I actually ordered a rose called Harry Wheatcroft, which also dates from the 1950s. And it's a striped rose. It's a red and yellow striped rose. And as you can see, this is not a red and yellow striped rose. It is a rather beautiful 1950s pink rose, however. And actually, I think it does look good in the garden here. Mislabelling is actually quite common. After all, when these roses are sent out in October, they don't even have any leaves, let alone any flowers, so it's easy to see how mistakes get made. But equally, I had bought the rose from a very large plant supplier that supplies all sorts of plants, and a gardening person has said to me that if I'd gone to a specialist rose supplier, there would probably been a greater chance of not having a mislabelling problem, although of course it can happen to anyone. There are still a few Selfcedars in the garden, and the main one is Lychnis coronaria, or otherwise known as rose campion. And this is the pink flower with the grey felty leaves. And this has been lovely for 2 or 3 weeks now, and I know that it'll probably go on for about another couple of weeks. And I then cut it back and there will be another flowering. So it's very good value, and it's a cottage garden plant, and it romps around the garden. It's just planted itself in these drifts. And the poppies are just going over, but I had this wonderful experience of filming a poppy and seeing how bees help the flowers open up. So this poppy that we're seeing here, its little cap that was holding it in is being pushed away. And it's being pushed away partly by the flowers which are unfurling, but partly because there's this bee that's trying to get in there. And once it's got in, it sort of bullocks about, and then eventually it flies out again, and then it tries to get back in again. Around the beginning of July is also when we really see grasses coming into their own, and this particular grass is called Stipa tenuissima, and once again it's a plant that's been used a lot by garden designers over the last decade, to the point at which some people are saying, oh, I'm really sick of it, but actually I think it really looks lovely here. I found that this Stipa tenuissima has taken about just over a year, more like a year and a half, to get established. It was very disappointing when I planted it last year. So if you've planted it and you're disappointed, just give it a bit of time. The clematis, oh, this is Jackmanii. It's just gorgeous. And I cut it down to the ground every winter, so it just disappears, and then up it pops, and it's got these beautiful blue flowers. And it's usually around for 3 or 4 weeks at a time. I think another very good plant for this time of year is a hydrangea. There's 2 or 3 hydrangeas here which are really stunning, and one of them is Hydrangea arborescens Annabelle, which actually people have used quite a lot in garden design over the last decade, but it still has huge impact, and it comes out around the end of June, and its flowers then gently change colour until they're brown throughout the winter, and I don't need to cut them off until February, so that is 8 months from one plant, so I think that's pretty amazing. The other hydrangea that a lot of people commented on at Faversham Open Gardens was Hydrangea Miss Saori here, which is a relatively new hydrangea. I think it's been a Chelsea Plant of the Year quite recently, and it just seems to withstand anything. I've had it in this pot for about 3 years now, and I feed it occasionally, but really it doesn't get a lot of attention, and here it is looking really healthy and gorgeous. One of my favourite plants for this time of year is Acanthus mollis, and this is the all-white form. It's called Rue la Dan. Bear's breeches, or Acanthus mollis, is very invasive, and if you've got the one which is a purple and white tinged flower, then it will spread everywhere and it's really difficult to get rid of. But on the other hand, the Rue la Dan is less invasive. I love its white spires, and it's so architectural. These shapes will go on for really quite some time. So I think it has really earned its place in this garden. One new addition to the garden in the last week is that we've bought a new gazebo. We did used to have a central parasol over our table, but in terms of cost, a good parasol and a gazebo are very similar in cost. In fact, a really good gazebo is possibly a bit less than a really good parasol. It gives us much better protection from the rain and much better shade from the sun. So we're rather pleased with it. We had the choice between going for a really basic entry-level gazebo, which here in Britain are around £50 to £80, or actually buying something that was a little bit better, which costs about double. And we actually decided to go for the slightly more expensive one in the end, because of the following factors: is that the cheaper gazebos tend to be water resistant rather than waterproof. And it is quite nice if it starts to rain just to be able to sit there. The cheaper gazebos don't have extendable legs, and we have some very tall people in the family. So we decided that we wanted legs that could make it a little bit higher. And also the cheaper gazebos probably don't last as long because they haven't got reinforced fabric around where you pull the fabric over the frame. The more expensive gazebo also had a carrying bag and weights. So in the end, we decided that we would spend, in English money, it was £129, which actually is a very good price, and I think not far off what we paid for our old garden parasol. I thought it might be helpful to mention those factors in case you're thinking about sun protection in your garden, and there's a post about that in the Middlesized Garden blog, which I'll put in the links below. If you've enjoyed this, do please hit like, because then I'll know you'd like to see more garden tours. And also do let me know in the comments if there are specific things that you'd like me to cover in terms of gardening. And do subscribe to the Middlesized Garden YouTube channel and blog for tips, ideas and inspiration for your garden. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.